Etta Cade carried her own tally book to the fall members' meeting of the Ordway Cotton Growers Association. She set it on the table in front of her, closed, with a nub of red pencil laid across the cover. Vernon Tuck looked at it. Then he slid it back across the boards to her, slow, the way you'd push a plate you didn't order. And he handed her the coffee pot instead. She poured. She did not flinch. Vernon laughed. He turned to the 30-some sunburned growers filling that hot little hall, and he said it loud enough for the back row. "Bookkeeping's a man's headache, Mrs. Cade. You go on and keep the cups full." The room chuckled. Not cruel, most of them. Just easy. Just men agreeing with a man. Her husband Silas sat 3 chairs down, and he looked at the floor between his boots, and he said nothing at all. Now here is the thing not one man at that table knew. Before the dust ran the Cades west, before the mattress and the Bible and the quarter section buried under Oklahoma sky, Etta had spent 11 years reading the books of a Federal Reserve Bank. 11 years. She could hear a lie in a ledger the way those men could hear rain coming. A change in the air, a weight in the quiet, a thing you feel before you see it. She poured the coffee, and she waited. If you believe respect is earned in silence, this story is for you. Before we go on, if stories like this one find you, subscribe so the next one does too. And do me a small thing. Comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Now, back to Ordway. It was the fall of 1935 in Carrigan County, down in the San Joaquin Valley of California. Cotton country. Flat land that ran to a brown haze at every edge, and heat that sat on the roofs past sundown, and the smell of the gin working day and night when the bowls came in white and heavy. The Cades had come 2 winters before. They came the way half the valley came in those years, with too little in the truck bed and too much behind them. A mattress roped down, a Bible, a skillet, a churn, a box of seed they'd carried out of a place that could no longer grow it. The dust had taken their land in Oklahoma. Not a bank, not a drought alone, but the wind. The wind had come, and it had not stopped. And one morning Silas stood in the door and could not see the barn for the brown of the air. And Etta had said, "Quiet, we go west." And they went. Now they farmed cotton on shares, tenant growers, like a good many. The land was another man's, and the water was another man's, and half of everything they raised went back up the chain before a nickel of it was theirs. What was left, they lived on. It was thin living. But it was living, and after the dust, living was a thing you did not take lightly. They had paid their $12 to join the Growers Association, same as everyone. $12 was a great deal of money to the Cades. But you joined because the co-op pooled the cotton and sold it together and got a better price than a lone tenant could beg. And it ran the gin, and at the end of the season it paid out the pool money, every member's share of what the whole crop brought. That pool money was the difference between a winter with seed for spring and a winter without. So you paid your $12, and you belonged. Etta kept the family's whole survival in a 5-cent tally book. It was a small thing, cardboard covers gone soft at the corners, and inside it every figure that mattered. What they'd picked. What the co-op waited at. What was owed on the account at the company store. What the share came to. She wrote it small, and she wrote it clean, in a hand so even it looked printed, and she kept the columns square. She'd always kept the columns square. She could not help it any more than she could help breathing. She kept it in red pencil. A nub, worn down to the length of a thumb joint, the paint gone from the barrel where her fingers held it. It was not a new pencil, and it was not a cheap pencil bought for the farm. It was older than the farm. It was older than the dust. It was the pencil she had marked errors with, once, in another life. In rooms that smelled of ink and radiator steam and men's certainty. Bank rooms, examination rooms, the long tables where the books of the district came to be read. She had marked many a false figure with that red. She told no one what it had once done. She only sharpened it careful with a paring knife when it wore down, so it would last, because there would not be another one like it. That was the shame she carried, though shame is maybe too hard a word and not hard enough. Because there had been a bank, at the end of those 11 years, that failed on her watch. She had read its books and found the rot in them and set it all down plain in her red hand. Every falsehood, every hollow account, and the reading of it had been part of the ending of it. The way a doctor naming a sickness is part of the dying. Men lost their savings. A town lost its ground under it. She had done her work exactly right, and doing it right had helped bury the thing, and she had never been able to lay those two facts down beside each other and make peace between them. So when the dust gave her a reason to become someone new, she took it. Out here she was a farm wife with a neat hand. Nothing more. She meant to keep it that way. She was 41 that fall. A steady-looking woman, wide through the shoulders from fieldwork, gray coming in early at the temples. Her hands were work-hardened now, cracked at the knuckles, nothing like the soft examiner's hands they'd been. Her face gave little away. People took her for gentle, and she was gentle. People took her for simple, and there they were wrong, but she let them. The pool money was coming in 9 days. That was the number that hung over the whole town that fall, spoken and unspoken. 9 days to the settlement. The cotton was ginned, and pooled, and sold, or most of it. And the association would total the season and pay each member his share, and in a lean year that share was the ground you stood on going into winter. Everyone was counting. Everyone had a figure in his head of what was coming and what it would cover. And the trouble was that the figures were not adding up. Not that anyone would say it out loud yet. But there was a wrongness in the air the way there'd been a wrongness in the air the morning the dust came. The pool looked short. Word went around, low, at the gin and the feed store and the church steps, that the fall money might come in under what a man had a right to expect. Nobody knew why. The market, folks said. The cursed market, that awful year. It was always the market when nobody knew. Etta went where the women went, and she listened where the women listened, and she carried her tally book, and she kept it square. And twice in those first weeks the men waved her off. The first time was over the gin ticket. The co-op weighed every load a grower brought in, and the weight on the ticket was the load he'd get paid on, and Etta had noticed. Just noticed. The way you notice a picture hung crooked, that the Cade's own field weights and the gin's weights did not sit right together. Not far off. A little. She had asked Silas about it, and Silas had asked, gentle, at the gin office, on her behalf, because she would not go herself. And the man there had said it was the trash. The gin docks you for trash and moisture, the man said. Leaves and dirt and damp in the cotton, that's the difference. That's always the difference. And Silas had come home and told her the trash, and Etta had said all right and written it down. But she had thought about it that night. Because the difference did not read like trash. Trash was ragged. Trash was a different number on every load, high one day and low the next, dirty picking and clean. This read even. This read like the same thin slice taken off the top of one load after another, and that was not how trash behaved. Trash was chaos. This had a hand behind it. She said nothing. She was good at saying nothing. The second time was at the church. The Ordway Community Church kept a relief fund in those years, as every church did, a little pool of coins and dollar bills for the family burned out, or the widow left short, or the migrant camp down by the ditch where the babies were sick. The pastor's wife, a kind, heavy woman named Loomis, kept the fund, and she kept it honest, and she kept it poorly. Because she had a good heart and no head for figures. And one afternoon at a quilting, fretting Mrs. Loomis said out loud that the relief book would not come right, and she'd been 3 nights over it, and it was off by better than $4, and she could not for the life of her find where. The other women made sympathetic sounds. Etta reached over and turned the book toward her, because Mrs. Loomis had it open on her lap, and she looked at it. Just looked. She did not take a pencil out. She ran her eyes down the columns, the deposits and the disbursements, the coins in and the dollars out, 3 months of a country church's small mercy. And she found it. She found it the way you find a face you know in a crowd, all at once, without trying. There was a giving entry set down twice, once in October and once again in November, the same $3.40 to the same burned-out family, written in twice and taken out of the total twice, so the fund read $4 and some short of what was truly in the box. "You've got the Pettit gift down 2 times, Etta said, soft and pointed. October and again the next month. Same amount. It's not gone, Mrs. Loomis, it's just written twice. Add the $3.40 back and take the second one out, and you'll come right." Mrs. Loomis looked, and her whole face changed, that lightning a person gets when a weight they can't name comes off them. "Well, I never," she said. "I never. You're right, look there." And she said it to the room, half laughing with relief. She keeps a neat figure. This one. The women went on with the quilting. It was nothing, a throwaway. She keeps a neat figure. It sat in the warm afternoon and was gone. But Etta had done it without a pencil, in her head, in the time it takes to draw a breath. She had read 3 months of a ledger and found the doubled entry the way a musician finds the sour note. And nobody in that room saw what that was. Nobody but Etta, who felt the old warmth of it in her chest and then felt the old fear right behind it, and folded her hands and looked back down at her sewing. She keeps a neat figure. It was the smallest door, cracked open an inch, and she leaned her weight against it and closed it and said nothing. It was around then that she noticed the thing about the 30th. She had reason to be near the co-op books more than a farm wife ordinarily would. Because Silas held a small office. Nothing. A courtesy. He checked the members against the roll at meetings, and because in a co-op the members had a right to see the running account, and Silas exercised that right politely now and again on the porch of the office while Vernon Tuck let him, indulgent. The way you let a child hold the reins. And Etta stood at Silas's shoulder those times. And she looked. She could not look. Vernon Tuck kept the books, and Vernon Tuck kept them, on their face, well, neat enough. But there were corrections in them. Every set of books has corrections. A man transposes a figure, catches it, sets it right. That is honest and ordinary. What was not ordinary was that Vernon's corrections were all of a kind. They were round. They were even dollars, or even fives, or even tens, never the ragged in-between numbers that a real mistake makes. A real mistake is off by $4.30, off by $11.15, off by whatever the crooked world hands you. Vernon's corrections were off by exactly 10. Exactly 25. Clean, invented-looking numbers, the numbers a man reaches for when he needs a figure and no true one exists. And they were all dated the 30th. The last working day of the month, or near it. Correcting entry, the 30th. Adjustment, the 30th. Month after month, the same date carrying the same round dollar corrections, as if the 30th were the day errors chose to happen. Errors did not choose a day. Errors fell where they fell. But a man closing his books each month, a man who needed the total to come out to a figure he'd already decided on, that man would reach for a round number on the last day of the month and push the column where he wanted it. That is what a plug looks like. She knew what a plug looked like. She had spent 11 years finding them. She said nothing about the 30th. She wrote it in the back of her own tally book, small, in the corner, just the dates and the round figures, the way you'd note the weather. Not an accusation. A record. She told herself it was only that she could not help keeping records. That was almost true. Then came the members' meeting. They held it in the same little hall they always used. A frame building beside the gin with a plank floor and hard chairs and windows that would not open past a hand's width, so that by the time 30-some men were in it in the fall heat, the air went thick and the collars went dark. The settlement was coming in 9 days, and the men had questions, because the word of the short pool had gone all the way around town by then, and a man's winter was riding on the answer. Marsh Dieter sat at the head of the table. He was the board president, 60 years old, a decent man and a tired one. A grower who'd been given the gavel because he was honest and well-liked and because nobody else wanted it. He was over his head, and he knew it. He could run a farm and he could shake a hand, and he could not, to save his soul, read a column of figures against another and say which one lied. So he leaned on the man who could. He leaned on Vernon. Vernon Tuck was 38, the secretary-treasurer, the one man in the county who understood the books. He was quick, and he was easy, and he had a way of talking that made a hard thing sound-handled. He wore a town shirt among the field shirts, and he was not ashamed of it. When the men pressed him on the short pool, he did not flinch either, and there is a lesson in that the honest woman and the thief both knew how to hold still under a hard question. He spread his hands and he blamed the gin dust on the scales, said the old beam scale threw off a little every load, and it added up over a season. He blamed the market, that cursed market, prices off what they'd been. He said it soothing, and he said it certain, and the men who did not want to lose their winter wanted very much to believe him, and mostly they did. Etta sat along the wall with the 2 or 3 other wives who'd come. She had her tally book. And when Vernon finished and the men grumbled and settled, she did a thing she had promised herself she would not do. She raised her hand. Marsh Dieter, kind and unthinking, nodded to her. "Mrs. Cade, I wonder about the freight," Etta said. She said it soft, apologetic almost, a farmwife's question. "The hauling charges on the pool. There seem to be a good many of them, this year. I only wondered if they'd been gone over. Against last year." It was a small question. It was, in truth, the whole thing, though not a soul in that room heard it as anything but a woman fussing. Because she had seen the freight line in the books over Silas's shoulder, and the freight line was fatter than the crop could account for, load after load of hauling billed against the pool, and it was the one line she could not make sit down. Vernon Tuck looked at her. And he smiled, and he reached out and picked up the coffee pot from the sideboard behind him, and he held it out to her across the table, and he said, warm as anything, "Bookkeeping's a man's headache. Mrs. Cade, you go on and keep the cups full." The room laughed. The heat and the worry broke in them and came out as a laugh, and it rolled around that little hall. And a man near the back said something, and the laugh went again. It was not hatred. That was almost the worst of it. It was ease. It was 30 men who had never once thought to wonder what a woman might know, laughing because a woman had reached above her station and a clever man had put her back in it gentle, and the world was as it should be. Silas Cade looked at the floor. "That is the thing I want you to see. Not Vernon. Vernon was only a thief protecting a hole. But Silas loved her. Silas knew better than any man alive exactly what his wife had been and exactly what she could do, and he sat 3 feet away, and he studied the grain of the plank floor between his boots, and he did not stand up. Because he loved her too much to push her into that room, and not enough to trust that the room could not hurt her, and those 2 things together kept him nailed to his chair. She saw him look down. She would carry that longer than she'd carry Vernon's coffee pot. Etta stood. She crossed to the sideboard, and she took the pot, and she went around that table, and she filled the cups. Every one. Steady, the coffee not spilling, her face giving nothing. She poured for the men who'd laughed. She poured for Marsh Dieter, who would not meet her eye. She poured for Vernon Tuck, and he said thank you kindly, and she said you're welcome, and she meant nothing by it that he could hear. And as she moved around the table with the pot, unhurried, invisible, a farmwife doing the one thing they'd allow her to do, she let her free hand rest a moment on the sideboard where the loose weigh tickets lay in a careless stack. The day's gin tickets, the carbon slips, waiting to be filed. And when her hand came away, it came away with 3 of them, folded once, gone up her sleeve as clean as a card trick. Nobody watched the woman pouring coffee. That was the whole use of being unwatched. She had learned it late, in a hall full of men, and she would not forget it. She finished the pot. She set it back on the sideboard. She took up her closed tally book with the red pencil across it, and she nodded to the room the way you nod when you leave, and she walked out into the evening with 3 shaved tickets against her wrist and her heart going hard and even under her plain dress. Silas came out after her. They walked to the truck without a word. Halfway there he said, "Lo, Etta, just that." And she said, "It's all right, Silas," and it was not all right, and they both knew it. And they got in the truck and drove the dark road home between the cotton, and neither of them said the other thing. She lit the lamp at the kitchen table when they were home and the children were down. Silas stood in the doorway a while, and then he went to bed, because he did not know what she was doing and he was afraid to ask. She waited till the house was quiet. Then she took the 3 tickets out of her sleeve and smoothed them flat on the formica, and she took her own tally book and she opened it to the pages where she'd written down, load by load, in her printed red hand, what the Cades had actually picked and what their own scale at the field's edge had actually said. She laid the growers' field weights beside the co-op's gin tickets, her own numbers and Vernon's numbers, side by side in the yellow lamplight, and she read them the way she had read 1,000 such pairs in another life. And there it was. Not trash. Never trash. Every ticket short. £18 here. £30 there. 40 on the big load. Never the same number twice, but always the same direction, always down, always the co-op's weight lighter than the grower's own, and never enough on any one load for a man to squawk about. Because 18 pounds of cotton is a few cents, and no farmer's going to call another man a liar over a few cents and the moisture in the air. But 18 pounds off every load, off every grower, off a whole season and a whole membership. That was not a few cents. That was a river running one way, a thin, steady bleed off the top of every bale that came through that gin, and it ran somewhere, and it did not run into the pool. She sat with it. The old cold clarity came over her, the thing she'd felt at the long tables, the thing that had once been her pride and had become her fear. She was not guessing now. She could see the shape of it. The shaved weights took it off the growers coming in, and the fat freight line, the hauling she'd asked about, the question that bought her a coffee pot, that was where some of it went back out, dressed as a cost. Money out the front as short weight. Money out the back as freight that maybe never moved a bale. 2 ends of the same rope. And Vernon Tuck standing in the middle of it, the only man who understood the books, the only man who could. She thought of the church fund, the doubled entry she'd found without meaning to, and she almost smiled, because that was an honest woman's honest mistake, and this was its opposite. This was a mistake made on purpose over and over with a steady hand, and she of all the people in Carrigan County could tell the two apart in the dark. And here is where the timid woman would have stopped. Here is where the woman they thought she was would have folded the tickets back up and slid them under the flour tin and been glad she'd kept her mouth shut and let the pool come short and let the winter be lean and been safe. Because she knew what came of naming the rot in a set of books. She had named it once and helped bury a bank and a town and had never slept easy since. She knew the cost. She had paid it. She sat there a long time with the lamp low and the red pencil in her fingers, not writing, just holding it, that worn nub from the room she never spoke of. And somewhere in that long quiet, she made a different decision than the safe one. Not to accuse. She would not stand up in that hall and call Vernon Tuck a thief on a farmwife's word. They'd laugh again. Harder. And hand her a broom this time, and it would come to nothing and cost her everything. No, she would not accuse. She would prove. She would build it so square and so plain that when she finally laid it down, there would be nothing to laugh at and nothing to wave off. Only the figures, only the truth in a column, so complete that a decent, tired man like Marsh Dieter could look at it and see. She would do the one thing she was better at than any man in that county. She would read the books all the way to the bottom. And she would not say a word until it was done. But she needed the freight file. The tickets told her what came off the growers. The freight file, the hauling bills, who was paid what to carry what where, that was the other end, the money going out. And without it she had half a truth, and half a truth proves nothing. So the next day she had Silas ask, polite, on the office porch, whether the members might see the season's freight bills, it being members' money that paid them. A fair request. An ordinary right. Vernon Tuck was sorry. Vernon Tuck was so very sorry. The freight file was mislaid, he said. Gone astray in the move when they'd shifted the office in the spring, or gone into the wrong drawer. He'd surely turn it up before settlement, no cause to worry. He had the totals in the ledger, and the totals were what mattered. He said it easy, and he said it kind, and he saw Silas off the porch, with a hand on his shoulder. Silas came home and told her. Mislaid, and Etta stood at her own kitchen window with her hands in the dishwater and looked out at the flat brown land running to its haze, and she understood, calm and cold, that the file was not mislaid at all. A man does not lose the one file that would hang him. A man hides it. Vernon Tuck had felt the smallest tremor in the ground under him, a farm wife asking about freight, and he had quietly put the freight where no one could see it. Which told her two things. It told her she was right. And it told her she was already, without meaning to be, in the game, that the man across the board had made his first move to cover his tracks, and did not yet know he was playing against the one person in the valley who could read every card he held. She dried her hands. She looked at the calendar nail by the door where the settlement date was marked. 9 days had become 7. 7 days to the pool, and the one file she needed was locked away in the dark by the man who'd taken the money, and she was a farm wife they'd handed a coffee pot, and she had 3 shaved tickets and a nub of red pencil and 11 years nobody knew about. She stood in her quiet kitchen and she began, very carefully, to think about the gin, about who worked it, and who pitied her, and where in that long, hot building a man might keep the carbon copies of a bill he'd made up out of nothing at all. She went to the gin on a Thursday, at closing, when the light had gone long and orange across the yard and the last wagon had pulled away. She told Silas she was carrying a supper plate to Odell Frame, the weighmaster, because his wife was poorly and a man alone forgets to eat. That much was true. The rest she kept. Odell was a stooped man with cotton lint in the creases of his neck and a kindness that had never done him a lick of good. He'd known the Cades since they came west with a mattress on the truck. He pitied Etta the way a decent man pities a good woman handed a coffee pot, and pity, she had learned, opens more doors than cunning ever will. She set the plate down on his scale house desk. She let him eat. She talked about nothing, the market, the dust, whether the pastor's boy would mend. And then, easy as asking the time, she said she wondered if he still kept the old freight carbons. Odell wiped his mouth. Which ones? The hauling bills, she said. Ridgeline transfer. She kept a little book for Silas, she said, and she liked her figures to match. And the co-op freight numbers never had. Probably her mistake. She was likely reading them wrong. But it would set her mind at ease to see the carbons. He looked at her a long moment. Then he opened a low drawer, the one that stuck, and lifted out a fat rubber-banded packet furred gray with dust, 3 seasons of it. Nobody'd asked for these in years, he said. Vernon keeps the file up to the office. These are just my copies. I punch a hole and string 'em and forget 'em. He gave them to her the way you'd give a woman a recipe. No weight to it in his mind at all. She thanked him. She carried the packet home under the supper cloth like it was warm bread. And her hands were steady, and her heart was going like a hammer on tin. That was the night the timid farm wife stopped being timid, though not one soul in Ordway saw it happen. It happened at a kitchen table, under a lamp, with a nub of red pencil. She worked after Silas slept. She worked the way she used to work in a marble room with a brass rail, back when men in stiff collars waited on what her red pencil found. She laid the freight carbons out in rows. She matched each hauling bill to the load it claimed to carry, and each load to the gin's own run sheet, and each run sheet to the weather. And the first thing the numbers told her was a thing she already half knew. Ridgeline Transfer did not haul cotton. Ridgeline Transfer hauled money. $40 a load. 45, 50 on the big pulls. Bill after bill, all fall, all spring, all the fall before. Loads that supposedly left the Ordway yard for the rail spur at Delano and the compress at Bakersfield. She checked them against Odell's own tally of what rolled out the gate, because Odell wrote down every wagon and truck that crossed his scale, honest as a clock. And the trucks on the Ridgeline bills weren't on Odell's sheet. Not one. A truck can't leave a yard and not cross the scale. These never left. They never existed. They were ink. She found the load dated the 30th of September, and she stopped, and she sat back, and she said one soft word to the dark kitchen that she would not have said in church. Because on the 30th of September, the gin had been down. The number 3 stand had thrown its packing, and Odell had told her so himself weeks back, complaining, a whole day lost, boys sent home, not a lock of cotton moved. Nothing crossed his scale that day. Nothing could have. And yet there it was in Vernon Tuck's freight file. $55. Ridgeline Transfer. One load, Ordway to Bakersfield, the day the gin sat dead as a stone. A man will hide a lot of things. He is careless with the one he thinks no one can read. She traced it all, night after night, the lamp low so it wouldn't wake the house. She saw the whole clockwork of it now, and it was a pretty piece of work, she'd give him that. Vernon Tuck had built himself 3 machines and run them together. The first machine was the scale. Every load that came in from every member got weighed light. 18 pounds gone off a small lot, 30 off a middling one, 40 on the big loads. A farmer hauls in his cotton, dead tired, and watches the beam settle, and he can't argue with a scale. The scale is the co-op, the scale is science. The scale is the one thing in his hard life that isn't supposed to lie. So he took the ticket and drove home, short 40 pounds and not knowing it. Do that to 34 families, load after load, all season, and you have skimmed a small mountain of cotton that belongs to nobody the books admit exists. The second machine turned that stolen cotton into stolen dollars, and that was Ridgeline Transfer, the phantom hauler, the ink truck, the freight bills that carried the skim out the back door as an expense so the pool would come up short and no man could say where the shortage went. It went to freight. Freight was Vernon's country. Nobody questioned freight. Freight was a man's headache. And the third machine was the ugliest and the cleverest, and it took her the longest to see. It was the lapping. This fall's early receipts, the first checks that came in from the compress, were quietly going to plug last spring's hole, so that if anyone ever ran a finger down the column, the spring pool looked whole. It looked paid. It was paid, with money stolen fresh this fall, which meant this fall's pool would in turn come up short, to be plugged next spring with money not yet stolen. He was robbing tomorrow to pay yesterday, forever, and it would hold together exactly as long as the cotton kept coming, and no one ever added it all up at once. She added it all up at once. $6,480. Across 3 pools. 34 families, some short $70, some short $190, depending on their acres. $6,480 gone from the pockets of people who patched their children's shoes with cardboard, and it had walked out of that gin, one shaved bale at a time, inside a truck that did not exist. She sat with that number a long while. It was more money than she had seen in one place since the marble room. And it made her tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Because she knew this feeling. She'd felt it before, in another life, the night she'd first understood that the bank she was sent to examine was rotten clean through. and that naming the rot would end it, and that ending it would put honest tellers and honest widows out on the street just the same as the thieves. She had named it anyway. The bank had closed. She had been right, and being right had cost people she never met their whole savings, and she had come to believe, in the dust years after, that her gift was a kind of curse, that the sharpest eye at the table is the one that draws the blood. She had promised herself, out here, that she would keep her head down and pour the coffee and let the men have their headache. She had kept that promise for 2 winters. She looked at the $6,480. She thought of Odell's honest tally. She thought of the pastor's wife counting the relief fund twice because it never came out the same. She thought of 34 families in 7 days. She unkept the promise. There was one more thread, and she pulled it because she'd learned long ago that a fraud always signs its own name somewhere, out of vanity or laziness or the plain need of a place to send the checks. Ridgeline Transfer got paid. Money that leaves a co-op has to land. She found the address on the bottom of every bill, small, a post office box in Tulare, the next county over. A hauling company with a fleet of ghost trucks and nothing but a mailbox. It took her 2 more days and a careful, sideways word to a cousin of Odell's who worked the Tulare post office to learn the last thing. Box 114, Tulare, was rented in the name of a woman. Not Vernon Tuck. A woman named Alma Reese. And Etta, who forgot nothing, remembered the co-op picnic her first summer, and Vernon standing up to toast his bride, and calling her, fond and loud, my Alma. Reese that was. Prettiest schoolteacher in Kern County. His wife's maiden name. The phantom hauler wore his wife's girl name like a wedding ring turned around to hide the shine. She had him. She had all of him, on paper, in red pencil, spread across her formica table under a farmhouse lamp. And she was still, to every man in Ordway, the woman who kept the cups full. She did not know that up at the co-op office, a stranger had come to town. Emmett Pruitt was a farm credit man, sent down from the district office for the annual audit. And he came a week early because he liked to see a set of books before the men who kept them knew he was coming. He was 50-some, dry, with reading glasses pushed up on a bald head and 40 years of other men's arithmetic behind his eyes. Vernon Tuck met him at the office door, all smiles and coffee, and said what a pleasure, what an honor, though the smile did not reach any place warm. Pruitt asked, as he always asked, for the old federal roster. Cross-checking, he said. The Bureau liked its examiners to verify the standing of any former federal personnel resident in a co-op's district. Formality, Vernon didn't know what he meant and didn't care and left him to it. So Pruitt sat alone with the roster, a long yellow government sheet. The list of every soul who had ever held a federal financial post and now lived out in the western districts, dust-blown, scattered, changed, he ran his finger down it out of habit. And near the bottom, in the reserve district column, his finger stopped. E. Marsh, Examiner, Grade 4. 11 years service. Last posting, a bank he knew the name of. A bank that had failed in '30 and taken a lot of noise down with it. The examiner who'd called that failure had been spoken of, in the small dry world of bankmen, with a particular respect, the one who read the rot early and said it plain and got no thanks for it. E. Marsh, he remembered now. A woman. Unusual back then. They'd made a small fuss of it, and then the dust had swallowed everybody. E. Marsh. Married name in the resident column, penciled by some clerk years ago, Cade. Emmett Pruitt took his glasses down off his head and set them on the table and sat very still for a moment in the empty co-op office. Then he read the co-op's books straight through. The ledger Vernon had handed him with such a warm smile. And what he saw was a competent lie, a good lie, the kind that fools farmers and board presidents. It did not fool him. But it would take him a week to prove, and he had a week. He said nothing to Vernon Tuck. He waited, the way his kind wait. He wanted very much to meet the woman named on the roster before the settlement. Vernon Tuck was not a stupid man, and stupid men are the only ones who never smell the weather turning. He'd felt something all week. Odell had let slip, careless, that Ms. Cade had borrowed his old freight carbons for her little household book, and Vernon had laughed at the supper table and not slept that night. A farm wife with the freight carbons. It was nothing. It was a woman balancing a grocery list, and it sat in his belly like a stone anyway. So he did what a cornered clever man does. He got ahead of it. He went to Marsh Dieter, the board president, 60 years old and honest and lost, and he poured concern all over him. It had come to his attention, he said, that the Cade woman had been going around to Odell and to others, stirring, asking after co-op records she'd no business in, an outsider, a share tenant's wife, no standing, no training, likely nursing some grievance from that unpleasantness at the fall meeting. Vernon was worried, he said. Worried she'd sow doubt in the members right when they needed to stand together and get their money. He thought, and he said it gentle, reasonable. He thought the board ought to bar her from the records. For the co-op's good. For unity's sake. And Marsh Dieter, who wanted only to save the co-op's name and the members' fall money, and who did not know he was being handed a knife by the man holding the wound, Marsh Dieter nodded, troubled, and said maybe that was wisest. That was Monday. Settlement was Wednesday. 2 days. Somebody told Silas. In a place like Ordway, somebody always tells. Silas came in from the field gray-faced and told Etta they were going to bar her. That Vernon had gone to the board and called her a troublemaker with no standing. And that the board was minded to agree. And that come the settlement meeting she'd not be let near the books at all. Etta looked at her husband. 2 winters of pouring coffee. 11 years he had never asked about. She said, "Quiet, Silas. I need you to get me into that room. Just into it. I'll do the rest." And Silas Cade, who loved his wife's mind and had never once in 20 years pushed her toward a table full of men, looked at the tally book on the kitchen table and the red pencil beside it. And he understood at last that the thing he'd married was not a farm wife who happened to keep neat figures. He'd always known it, he'd just never made himself say it. "I'll get you in the room," he said. The settlement meeting filled the same long hall. Same 30-some sunburned growers on the same folding chairs. Same board table up front, Marsh Dieter in the middle looking like a man at his own funeral. The coffee pot sat cold on the sideboard where it always sat, and Emmett Pruitt sat off to the side, a stranger in a town suit, saying nothing, watching everything. With a black government audit book closed on his knee, Marsh Dieter called it to order and got right to the grief of it. The pool was short again. Bad, he didn't have to tell them how bad, they'd all done the arithmetic on their own porches. He said the board had gone over it with Vernon, and it was the market and the gin dust on the scales and the freight, always the cursed freight. And there was nothing to be done but split the shortage among them all and take the loss like men. And then, because Vernon had prepared the ground, Marsh cleared his throat and said there was one more matter. It had been raised that a member's wife had been going into co-op records she'd no standing in, and to keep order the board thought it best that Silas Cade stood up. He was not a standing-up man. The room turned to look at him because it was strange. He held his hat in both hands, and his voice came out low, and it did not shake. "Let her talk," he said. Marsh Dieter blinked. "Silas, let her talk," Silas said again. "Marsh, you've all handed my wife a coffee pot for 2 years. Hand her 5 minutes. If she's wrong, you can bar her after, and I'll take her home and never say another word. But you'll let her talk first." And Vernon Tuck, from the board table, smiling, spread his hands and said, "Now, Silas, this isn't the place. The woman's upset. No cause to." "I'm not upset," Etta said. She had risen from the back without anyone marking when. She had the tally book in one hand. She came up the center aisle between the folding chairs, past the men who'd chuckled at her, and she did not hurry, and she did not raise her voice, and something in the plain steadiness of her walking shut the room up better than a gavel. Marsh Dieter, God bless his honest lost soul, looked from Vernon to Silas to the still woman in the aisle and made the one good decision of his presidency. 5 minutes, he said. Ms. Cade, say your piece. She reached the longboard table and she began, without heat, to lay her things down on it where the men could see. 3 shaved weight tickets, smoothed flat, a stack of freight carbons furred with dust, her 5-cent tally book, and the red pencil nub which she set across the top of it all like a man lays down a tool he's done kneading. She did not accuse anybody. That was the terrible part, the part the men never forgot after. She just asked questions, the way she'd once asked them across a brass rail, and let the numbers answer. She held up a weight ticket. This is the Hollis lot, she said from the second pool. The gin scale wrote it at 312 pounds. Here is Ott Hollis's own weigh slip from the county platform the same morning, 342. 30 pounds. She set it down. Every ticket in this room is light. I have 31 of them. The lightest is short 18 pounds, the heaviest 40. It is not gin dust. Gin dust does not always steal in your favor, gentlemen. It steals both ways. This only steals one. The room had gone very quiet. She picked up a freight carbon. And here is where the missing cotton went. Ridgeline transfer. Vernon's freight line, the cursed freight, Marsh, the one we're all supposed to take like men. $40 and $50 a load all season to haul cotton out of this yard. She turned to Odell Frame, sitting stricken in the third row. Odell weighs every wagon that crosses that scale, in or out. Odell, did Ridgeline Transfer's trucks ever cross your scale? Odell Frame stood up slow, twisting his hat. No, ma'am, he said. His voice cracked. I never once weighed a Ridgeline truck. I figured they loaded at the spur. He looked at Vernon and his face changed as the thing arrived in him. There ain't no Ridgeline trucks, he said to nobody, to himself. There never was. Etta let that sit. Then she turned back to the board table to Vernon Tuck and she picked up one single carbon and held it out to him across the table. Polite, the way you'd hand a man the coffee pot. Vernon, she said, here is the freight bill for the load hauled out of Ordway on the 30th of September. $55. Ordway to Bakersfield. Would you read it to the room? Just read us the load that left this yard that day. Vernon Tuck did not take the paper. Read it, she said gentle. It's your file. You have the totals. You told Silas the totals were what mattered. He didn't move. And 30-some growers watched him not move. Because you can't, Etta said. And still she did not raise her voice, and that was what made it fall like a blade. On the 30th of September, the number 3 stand threw its packing, and this gin sat dead all day, and not one lock of cotton moved off this yard. Odell sent the boys home. Ask him. Nothing left here that day. Nothing could. But Ridgeline Transfer billed you $55 to haul a load that doesn't exist, out of a gin that was shut, in a truck that was never built, and that money came out of the pool, which means it came out of every pocket in this room. She set the paper down. You didn't lose a dime, gentlemen, she said. She looked down the long table, and then up at the whole silent hall. Vernon weighed it out of your pockets one bale at a time, and then mailed himself the receipt from a truck that doesn't exist. Nobody laughed. Nobody chuckled. There was no coffee pot sound in the room at all. Vernon Tuck came up out of his chair with his face working, and he did the only thing left to a cornered man. He got loud. This is a share tenant's wife, he said, wheeling on Marsh, on the room. Some dust migrant woman who read a grocery book wrong and thinks she's found. You're going to let her stand there, and, Marsh, I have run these books clean for 6 years. Ask the district. Ask the bureau. They audit us. We passed every. This woman has no standing, no training. She doesn't know a debit from a. I'll speak to her standing. The dry voice came from the side of the room. Emmett Pruitt stood up. He walked, unhurried, to the front. And he opened his black government book on the board table, and he put his glasses down off his head onto his nose. "My name is Emmett Pruitt," he said. "Federal Farm Credit Administration. I came down early for your annual audit, and I have spent this week in your books, Mr. Tuck." He turned a page. "This lady has done in 7 days what would take my office a month, and she has done it correctly." He looked at her, and something in the dry old face was close to tender. Every line, the shaved tears, the phantom holler, the lapping, this fall's receipts covering last spring's hole, which I confirmed Tuesday. $6,480 across 3 pools. I make it the same to the dollar as she does. He turned to Vernon. "And the post office box in Tulare, Mr. Tuck, box 114. Rented to a Miss Alma Reese." He let the name lie there in the quiet. "Your wife's name, I'm told, before you married her." Vernon Tuck's mouth opened and nothing came out of it. "As for the lady standing," Pruitt said, and now he spoke to the whole room, to the 30-some men on the folding chairs, "you should know who you handed a coffee pot to." He looked at the yellow roster in his book. "This is Etta Cade to you. In the Federal Reserve District, she was E. Marsh, examiner, 11 years. She is the examiner who read the failure of a national bank early and said so plainly when it cost her every friend she had to say it, and every word she filed then stood. And every word she has said to you tonight would stand in any federal court in this country." He closed the book. "I would stake my own pension on her figures. I have, in fact, staked the government's audit on them, because I checked, and she is right." And the men who had chuckled at the coffee pot went quiet one at a time, the way lamps go out down a street. There was no cheer in it. There was something better than a cheer. There was the particular silence of 30 proud men, each privately ashamed. Each looking at the plain, steady woman by the board table and seeing, too late, exactly who had been standing among them all along. Etta did not gloat. She had never in her life gloated, not in the marble room and not here. She stood with her hands folded on her tally book and let the truth do its own slow work, which is all she had ever asked of it. Marsh Dieter sat down hard in his chair like his strings were cut. Then he reached across and drew Etta's tally book toward him, and he opened it to the page where she'd written every family's name and every family's shortage in her small, even hand. And he began, in a broken voice, to read it out. Because he understood that the men needed to feel it, not hear a total. A total is a number. A number is a headache. But your own name and your own money and the honest, ruined voice of your board president is a wound. Ott Hollis, Marsh read, short $110. Del Prather, short 70. The Vasquez brothers, on their acres, short 190. He went down the list, 34 names, $70 to 190. And after each name the man it belonged to made some small sound, or made no sound at all. And every one of them turned and looked at Vernon Tuck. And Vernon Tuck had to stand at the front of that hall and hear his neighbor's losses read into the air one at a time with his own arithmetic as the proof. He tried once more, weakly, to speak. Marsh Dieter lifted his gray head from the book and said, "Vernon, don't." And Vernon didn't. The county sheriff was at the back door. Pruitt had seen to that on his way in. Quiet, the way his kind see to things. 2 deputies walked Vernon Tuck out of the members' hall, and nobody stood, and nobody spat, and nobody struck him. Etta had made sure of that without saying a word, just by never once raising her voice, so that the room had no permission to become a mob. He went out into the fall dark a small man, and the door shut, and that was all. Etta gathered her 3 tickets and her carbons and her tally book. She picked up the red pencil nub last and put it in her apron pocket. Then she sat back down in her folding chair beside her husband, an ordinary woman in an ordinary dress, and folded her hands, and the meeting went on without her because the rest was just the county's business now. Silas put his rough hand over both of hers. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. 20 years and he'd finally stood up in a room of men and said, "Let her talk." And she'd let him see, at last, the whole of what he'd married. That was enough for both of them. 9 days later, the pool paid. It paid in full every family's fall money whole, and on top of it the recovered skim came back in pieces over that winter as the state pried it loose, the tulare box, the accounts, what could be got. The Cade's share bought seed for spring and a winter's rent with a little over, and for the first time in 2 Western years Etta did not lie awake doing subtraction in the dark. The state files, when they came, called what Vernon Tuck did conversion of cooperative funds. That was the legal name for it. The growers of Ordway had a different name. They called it the pounds Vernon owed us, and they said it dry, the way farmers say most true things, and the phrase went around the county and outlasted the trial. They asked her, that winter, to keep the co-op's books, the whole board, hats in hand, on her porch. She said no. She said she'd sooner farm cotton than examine one more ledger for pay as long as she lived. And they took it for modesty. And it wasn't. It was peace. But she said she'd check their work of an evening, free, if Odell Frame kept the scale and a young fellow with clean hands kept the pencil. And that suited everyone fine. So it comes to a spring afternoon, the light gone soft and honey-colored across the kitchen formica, dust motes hanging still in it. The screen door opened to a warm breeze. Odell Frame's 10-year-old girl sits at Etta's table with her tongue between her teeth, learning to keep a column, how you write the figure plane, how you carry the 10, how you never crowd the line, how a clean column can't lie to you if you don't let it. The girl gets a total wrong and screws up her face. Etta reaches into her apron and takes out the little nub of red pencil, worn down now near to nothing. The same red pencil that once marked the rot in a national bank and once shaved nothing and hid nothing in a cotton co-op because it was in the right hand. She sets it in the child's fingers. "Here," she says. "Mark where it doesn't come out even. That's not a mistake, honey. That's the truth trying to get your attention. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." The girl bends over the page, and the red pencil moves, and the honey light lies warm on the table, and out past the screen door the flat land runs green now to its haze. The quietest hand at the table is often the one that reads the truth. They handed her a coffee pot because she was gentle and small and easy to look past, and gentle she surely was. But gentle is not the same as blind, and quiet is not the same as weak, and the person you're most sure has nothing to teach you is very often the one who's already read every card you hold. Comment if you've ever been underestimated by people who should have looked a little closer.